I'm delighted that you're all here today, and I'm excited about our speaker today, Costa Kapothanasis. Costa is, a person I admire, and I'll tell you why. I think it's really impressive when you start a career. You've got your degree, you start a career, and you're at a big company. He was working at T. Rowe Price. Great job, and his wife will tell you, great income, and he comes home one day and he says, you know what, I'm just not happy. This isn't fulfilling me. And so he says, I want to take a risk and go off on my own and be an entrepreneur. And if you talk to entrepreneurs, this is what they'll tell you, that they wanted to be in control. They want to be able to do things themselves. And so people like Costa that are willing to take that risk and do it on their own, I think are rather impressive. And so I thought it would be great for you to hear his story, to hear how he did it, because every one of you in here, if given the drive and the opportunity, could do this as well, and that's part of his message. So I know that you'll give him a great Mount welcome. He is a 2010 graduate of the Mount, a baseball player, and a great citizen on campus. So Costa, great to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Einoff had a great idea. I was actually going to hand out, I have some of my books here. I was going to hand them out to the first 20 people who come through the door, but he said, why don't you give them to anyone that volunteers and is brave enough to ask a question during the Q&A. So hopefully that's enough of a draw to get some questions. But I want to thank Dr. Einoff for inviting me here to talk about entrepreneurship, because it's very important to me. It's what I'm most passionate about. I want to thank the Bold School of Business and Mount St. Mary's as well, and all of you for coming here to listen to me talk. My name's Constantine Kapothanasis. Everyone calls me Costa. And I believe that I am an entrepreneur. It's a term that kind of is getting thrown around pretty flippantly these days. You'll see it in LinkedIn profiles and Instagram bios, and it's kind of lost its meaning. And we're living in a pretty interesting time these days where entrepreneur is looked upon. When you tell someone you're an entrepreneur, it's looked upon favorably. It wasn't too long ago where if you told someone you were an entrepreneur, they thought you were probably living in your dad's basement with an idea, or you're just trying to figure it out. For the most part, the term entrepreneur conjures up images of apps, blogs, websites, technology, startup culture. Can even sometimes conjure up an image of a kid in his dorm room in hoodies and a flip-flop creating a complex algorithm that becomes one of the world's largest businesses. But I want to talk about something that's much less glamorous, much less talked about, and much more practical. I'm a small business owner, and small business comprises 80% of the U.S. economy. We like to look at the world and think that everything's GE, Ford, these large companies, but that's just not the case. The majority of our economy is based upon companies that are 20 employees or less. And I wrote a book about this, and I had no intention of writing a book. I actually, much like everyone probably sitting here today, a lot of my stuff gets out on social media, and I was approached by a publisher, and they said, hey, you should tell your story. And the title of my book is The Zero Down Business, How to Buy a Business with Little to No Money. And I've done that multiple times now. I have 5 locations in my industry, in my lane, that I have bought sometimes with literally $0. And so one thing I had talked about with Dr. Einoff is just the whole practicality of it, because people think that buying a business is this difficult thing that you need a ton of money in order to do. And that's just not the case. And so I wanted to get the message out there that you don't need to have a ton of money to buy an existing business. We're living in a very interesting time right now because just the demographics of America right now, you have so many first generation business owners retiring that have no heir to their business. And that opportunity is really your opportunity. I know for me, I moved to Westminster, Maryland, and I follow the Carroll County Times on their Facebook page, because I don't think anyone actually gets newspapers anymore. But I see all the time businesses closing, and maybe you've seen it too, like your favorite restaurant or bar or barber shop shutting their doors because the owner's retiring. And you ask yourself, why? Why does that have to be? Why doesn't someone just step in and take it over? And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but more it's about figuring out the situation and figuring out if there's an opportunity there. But to give some context to my talk today, I'll talk a little bit about myself, where I started and how I got to where I am. But before I start with that, are there any Mount baseball players here today? None?
Practice.
I was going to probably practice. I was just going to tell them the year that we won the NEC championship, we started off our season 0-14 as well. And so I would hope that they take that adversity they went through in the beginning of the season and put it towards their conference schedule, and really hope they have the hope and the want to still win, because it can be done. So I own several businesses. I currently have 17 employees. I do a little over $1 million in revenue between my businesses per year. But even before I got to that point, there had always been hints of entrepreneurship in my life. I was actually recently on a TV program in Chicago, a finance show, and the host had asked me what my first business was. And truth be told, my first business was what I consider to be the perfect business model. I would go into my neighbors' yards, rip out their tomatoes, knock on their door, and sell them back to them. That is 100% margin for those doing the math, and it was fantastic. But whether it was flipping Pogs or Beanie Babies or selling Megan Paul my holographic Blastoise Pokemon card for $20 when I only bought it for $5, these are the kind of things that always seem to just come natural, and I think most entrepreneurs would have similar stories at some point in their life. And I wouldn't realize until later that these were the kind of traits that really were embedded deep in my DNA as an entrepreneur. But of course, baseball came into my life as a young person, and it kind of took over my whole life. And don't get me wrong, I love baseball. Baseball gave me the chance to travel the world, the country. It brought me to Mount St. Mary's. I don't know if you guys remember freshman orientation in Mount Auditorium, where they said, look to your left, look to your right. There's a 50% chance your spouse is in the crowd tonight. That was not the case for me. And that's because my wife was an upperclassman on the lacrosse team, because baseball players have a little bit more game. But she's sitting here right now. She's class of 2009. So, but with athletics, for everybody comes an end. Competitive athletics, whether your last game is a professional or you retire an NEC champion. But you find yourself asking, what now? What's next? And typically society will tell you, well, you have your degree, right? If you don't have it, go back and get it, and then go get a job. And that didn't seem right to me from the get-go, but that's what I did. It was tough. Graduating in 2010 wasn't easy. There was not many jobs out there. But you kind of toe the line and you do what you're told. And so I got a few jobs in the finance sector, and it took getting fired or almost getting fired from every single job that I held in order for me to realize this is not what life should be like. And I was sitting in my cubicle at T. Rowe Price, which is the 4th largest asset management firm in the country, and it's the 2nd largest company headquartered in Baltimore behind Under Armour. When I started Googling how can you buy a business, like where can you find a business for sale? And up until this point, the only place I'd ever seen businesses for sale was like Craigslist and eBay. And usually those are junk businesses. They're usually like asset sales, people just trying to get rid of their inventory, things like that. A lot of pawn shops, a lot of rundown burger joints, and that really doesn't do you any good unless you're Rick Harrison or Bob's from Bob's Burgers. But So after doing more research on buying a business, I began to see this website pop up more and more often. It's called Biz Buy Sell. And it turns out Biz Buy Sell is the largest marketplace for businesses for sale. It was acquired by the Wall Street Journal. Back pre-internet days, I don't know if anyone in this room besides the professors remember pre-internet days, but the only way you could find businesses for sale was on Thursday edition of the Wall Street Journal. There was a classified section of businesses for sale. But now, obviously, with the advent of the internet, you can have a website, brokers can have websites and list businesses that they're selling. But at this point in my life, I really didn't have that much money because me and my wife had just bought a house in Columbia, Maryland, and all the cash went to the down payment. So all our cash was tied up in that. And so I was also pretty invested in my career in finance at this point as well. I had my Master's of Science in Finance, which was paid for by one of my prior employees, one of the ones that had fired me, so the joke was on them really. But T. Rowe had sponsored me for many securities licenses. I was and am to this day a registered investment advisor with the SEC. I have several security licenses like the Series 7, 66, and 63. But I really had no intention of leaving my job at first, but I knew I wanted to have a business. I wanted to create what I considered a legacy, something that I could tie myself to. So the way that Biz Buy Sell works, and most business websites or marketplaces, is you find a business for sale, and once you find the business for sale, you request the books on it. And usually there's a broker or the owner is representing the sale. And so when you request the books, they'll reach out to you and they'll give you an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, which basically is them saying if you share any of the information about this business with anyone, we'll sue you. And after you sign it, they'll give you a balance sheet. Depending on how competent the broker or the business owner is, you'll either get a P&L. If you're really lucky, you'll get audited tax returns. But sometimes in the case of a convenience store that a friend and I bought in Baltimore, you'll get basically a napkin that says how much money they made the previous year. But what I did was I picked an industry that I was interested in owning a business, because one thing that is so true and it's so cliche is if you're not passionate about it, you really go crazy, because once you do decide to become an entrepreneur and decide to change your life in that fashion, it is a 24/7 game. It's you know, everyone here knows that there's a realistic expectation that if you get an email at 11:20, that the person on the other side of the email has an expectation that you might potentially answer it that day. Gone are the days that at 5 o'clock commerce ended. And so you really do need to have a passion for what you're doing, or else you'll quit, or any sane person would. So the industry that I am in is called the quick lube industry. And I hate to describe it like this, but this is the easiest way to relay it to people who aren't familiar with it. But I own basically a chain of Jiffy Lubes. But we're not Jiffy Lube because Jiffy Lube sucks and I don't. But what I did when I first started out was I requested the books on basically every quick lube that was for sale from Maine to Florida to California. And I analyzed the books. I was able to determine what made a good one, what were the good ones doing, what were the bad ones doing. And it gave me some insight to the industry, to what to look for. So I finally found one in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, right up Route 15 actually. So if you hop on 15 and just drive for an hour, you'll run into one of my stores. And at that point, it was just figuring out, putting in an offer. And so the negotiating part is not the difficult part. Dealing with people can be complicated, but usually it's a game of leverage. And if you do your due diligence, you find the leverage and you apply pressure to the leverage, and then you can get where you need to go. But in my case, this Harrisburg store, the owner wanted to sell the real estate and they wanted to sell the business together. Now, for the purposes of what I was trying to do, I was in no position to buy real estate because real estate typically requires traditional financing through like banks, which always, there's very few banks that will do zero down financing. But I put an offer in on the business, and we did what's called seller financing. And in my book, I go into very specific, concrete methods for buying businesses. And the most common one you'll ever run into is seller financing. And seller financing is good for a myriad of reasons, because one, it tells you that the owner is confident that the business will make enough money to pay them their note. Because all seller financing is you and another person coming together and deciding, I'm going to pay you this much over this amount of time, and this is going to be the collateral. So it's basically a privately held note. And if they're really sophisticated, they'll file what's called a UCC filing with the state so that it actually puts a lien on whatever it is you're buying, in this case a business. So we worked out the details for my first location, and I didn't have any money up front. So I did what's called a cash advance method, which this is not one that I would suggest to anyone sitting in this crowd unless you really have the brass to want to be an entrepreneur. I took out 8 credit cards on the same night, went on PayPal and cash advanced myself $10,000 to make the down payment. Now, that is a very drastic measure, but if you're really an entrepreneur, these are the types of things that you would do to get to the place that you want to be. Now, that is something I haven't had to go back to since then, thankfully, and all those credit cards have been paid off since then, and it has actually benefited me greatly in terms of the business. But the seller financing deal was structured in a way that I needed to come up with money up front, because the seller did require some money up front, but not so much that it made it not feasible. The second method for purchasing a business I want to talk about is called an assume lease purchase. An assume lease purchase is exactly what it sounds like. An assume lease purchase is when you assume the lease of the business, and basically the business owner is giving you their business. Now, when you do an assume lease purchase, this is also risky, because if you're taking over the actual corporate entity, you're also taking on any of their debts, liens, or anything else, any of their bad dealings that they may have done, and there's usually a reason why they're trying to get out of their lease so frantically. It's not uncommon in commercial leases to have long-term leases from anywhere from, my shortest lease is 5 years, but you can have them anywhere up to 25 to 30-year leases. So that's where doing due diligence really matters, because you can find yourself in a bad situation if you don't. The next method for buying a business with little to no money I want to talk about is called accounts receivable financing. Accounts receivable financing is when you use the cash flow from the business in order to purchase the business itself. So this only works if you get the business owner on board, or if the accounts receivable lender is willing to go based off bank statements that the seller has given to you. And basically the way it works is you have the business give you their bank statements, and they have a certain amount of revenue that comes in on a daily basis. The accounts receivable lender will determine how much they can take from that cash flow and give it to you up front, and then you pay it back from a daily slice of your revenue over however much time. And this is a dangerous financing option as well. It's very risky, because in a downturn, the account receivable financing lenders don't care about your cash flow. And I don't know how many of you are business majors, but in business, revenue coming in is basically oxygen. So it's one way, but not an ideal way. The next method I want to talk about for buying a business with little or no money is called sweat equity. Sweat equity is just what it sounds like. It's also very rare. I actually have part ownership of a business because of sweat equity. Basically, sweat equity is when someone needs work done that they can't do themselves, and you trade your labor for equity. And when you don't have money, you have time. And when time is your asset, you can utilize it however you need be. And so sweat equity is an option. And when I talk about all these options, especially some of these riskier ones, like Dr. Einoff said, like I had a good job. I was going along, doing my thing, but like I wasn't happy. Like, and I don't want to say I wasn't happy, but like there was something a little bit off. And I think part of being an entrepreneur is willing to take those risks in order to live the life that you want to live. And it's not easy. No one says it's easy, and it might appear easy, especially if the only thing you pay attention to is Instagram, because you might only get the one side of the story and not the other side. Because I know that my Instagram makes it look like I'm Charles Bronson or something, but there's a lot more to it than that, of course. But sweat equity is a difficult one. It's something that you would have to approach the seller about, and most of the time if they're trying to sell their business, it's not something they're interested in. In my situation, the owner of the business actually approached me and saw how well I was doing and asked me if I could step into his business, and he would give me a portion of it if I helped him out with some aspects of it. This is a quality method for buying a business with little to no money. It's called vendor financing. Now, if any of you are ever lucky enough to own your own business someday, you'll have vendors. Whether you're a law firm and you buy bulk commercial coffee, or you are a restaurant and you buy produce in bulk, you'll have vendors of some sort. And so vendors never want to lose a client. So they would much rather put up the money for someone to take over a business that they're about to lose rather than lose the business. So in my case, my largest purchase is oil. I buy about 1 million gallons of oil a year. And so if I were to retire, I guess, and put my business up for sale or just walk away, it would be in my distributor's best interest to find someone to step into my business so they continue to sell that 1 million gallons of oil every year. So vendor financing is the hustler's financing, in my opinion, because it takes hard work, it takes a lot of convincing, and it takes a lot of going after it, really, because you have to figure out who the vendor is and then approach them and basically come up with a plan for what you're going to do, especially if you don't have any experience in the market beforehand. But I highly suggest vendor financing as an option. I have several other options in the book, but those are some of the most common ones. The last one I want to talk about is crowdsourcing, which I think everyone here is probably familiar with. It's very popular with the modern entrepreneur. The crowdsourcing is things like Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and other online sources where you put your idea out there, and if people like it or think it's a good idea, they'll give you the money to pursue that. And I've seen businesses saved from crowdsourcing. The bakery down the street that Grandma has done for the last 20 years is she's closing up shop and no one wants it to close. Let's do a GoFundMe and raise enough money that the employees can take it over, and there you have it. So these are just some of the ways that I've used. Each method has its pros and its cons. You really have to let the situation dictate your direction. So I have a location in Chicago, and so I fly to Chicago about twice a month, and that situation wouldn't have worked if I didn't do my due diligence. I don't know if any of you have ever flown Spirit, but that's an airline that has a program that basically if you fly with nothing but your clothes, they have really good rates, and so I'm able to get out to Chicago twice a month to check on that business. And so it wouldn't be possible if I didn't do that due diligence. and find out that the situation works, because you really have to go where the situation takes you. The same thing goes for my Pittsburgh store. My most recent acquisition was a location in Pittsburgh, which is about, from Mount St. Mary's, probably 2 hours and 45 minutes, about. And that's another situation that the manager that was in place at that location before I took it over had been there for 10 plus years. Now, if that store, the manager had only been there for 6 months, that wouldn't have worked, because that's not a situation where I could be there every day and run the store because it's so far away. But because the manager pretty much has run the store for the past 10 years as it is, I felt comfortable going into that situation. But you also have to look at yourself and what you're trying to get out of it. My intention has always been to scale the business and become larger. Some people just want to work for themselves, and so if you're not willing to move, say I had no locations and that Pittsburgh store came up, but all I wanted to do was work for myself, and say the manager hadn't worked there for 10 years, you got to be willing to move if that's the life that you want to live. Otherwise, in my opinion, you're not really an entrepreneur. But that being said, I just don't think you can get romantic about how things should be. You need to deal with the way that things really are, because the market doesn't really care about your feelings. And as long as you make the sacrifices and you have the audacity to want to become an entrepreneur, then you'll live a very fulfilling life if you put in that work. So that's really my spiel on my background and my book. And I want to turn it to you guys. If you guys have any questions about any of my locations, I have 5 stores now. I have bought and sold a total of 7, and that's where I'm at right now. I'm in the middle of trying to acquire another one in Baltimore right now, and it's a daily grind. So it's always happening 24/7.
Go ahead. How long have you been acquiring businesses now for?
So I took over the Harrisburg location in 2014.
Okay.
So 3 years actually, pretty much to the day.
Okay. Thank you.
What made you decide on quick lube shops? Would it be the most profitable or most fulfilling for you?
So that's a great question. It's a quasi utility. Like I said, at first I had no intention of leaving my job, and so I was going to stay at T-Row and run the store at the same time. So I was looking at industries that ran kind of on their own. And when I say it's a quasi utility, I'm not saying oil changes are like your phone bill or your electricity, but if you drive a car, you get oil changes. So it's not like a TV purchase, which is kind of a discretionary purchase that you do every once in a while, usually on Black Friday. But that's the direction I went with that and how I got into that space. Plus, I've always enjoyed cars, and at its core, it's a retail business, so you're dealing with people on a daily basis, which is nice too. So you're serving communities versus some other businesses.
What was the hardest adjustment in your mindset becoming an entrepreneur?
Everything ends with you. So there's no, at a company as large as T. Rowe Price, you can always pass the buck on to someone else, and it'll get lost in the bureaucracy of large business somewhere down the line of middle management, because there's probably I don't know if you guys have seen Office Space, but I had 12 bosses. So if you mess something up, you could pass it on down the line. But when you're an entrepreneur, you gotta fix problems yourself. So when I first moved to Westminster, I got pulled over pretty early on because I was speeding on my way to Harrisburg, because one of my managers got locked out of the building, and if I don't go let him in, no one's going to. We're gonna have to be closed for the day. And so that was the toughest transition. Just knowing that you have to be accountable for every single action, no matter what. You can't pass blame on to any of your employees or the customers.
You said you took out a loan of like $10,000. Like, how much thinking went into that? Like, how long did it take you to like come to the conclusion that you're going to do that?
I put actually a lot of thought into it because the way that I did it, since I cash advanced myself the money via PayPal, and I decided to open up 8 credit cards on the same night to avoid it appearing as though, I don't know if I thought the credit card companies can't see that stuff or something, but I opened up 8 tabs on my browser, and I went to the very last page of the application on each of them. I pressed submit within like 10 seconds, and at the I just knew, I had the utmost belief in myself that I was going to be able to succeed as a business owner and that it would get paid off easily anyway. So, and some people would say that's naive. Some people might say you're blinded by your own ambition. But I put a lot of thought into the mechanics of it. I don't know how much thought I put into it other than I really wanted to own my own business.
Which is the number that you think you can run, like keeping buying businesses in the same industry that you can handle yourself, and which would be the point at which you need to build structure in order to handle those? Do you want to build
Yeah, so
huge amount of?
it's funny, the founder of Jiffy Lube actually lives in Westminster, and he got forced out of his own business for growing too quickly.
Yeah.
And when Jiffy Lube went public, the board voted him out, much like Steve Jobs got voted out of Apple, because he opened up that. As of right now, because I have a store in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. I have a store in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'll have the Baltimore store hopefully soon, and I'll spend most of my time between those 3. I get out to Pittsburgh twice a month. I get out to Chicago twice a month. I think at that point, if I do open the Baltimore store, I'm going to have to look into probably hiring a regional manager, like a central PA-based regional manager to oversee the Mid-Atlantic stores, so that'll allow me time to pursue new locations. Because at the end of the day, the quick lube industry is not it's the only way to scale it is to open up new locations. It's not like you can't sell oil changes online. So I do have ambitions to have a chain competitive with Valvoline and Jiffy Lube, because I think there's a market need for someone to step in and actually care about the customers rather than upsell. And if anyone's familiar with Jiffy Lube, they're very high pressure situation, and so we're kind of the antithesis of that. We're very customer service oriented.
Yeah, it costs you, doesn't matter whether the business is incorporated or unincorporated, or don't you care?
Most of the time it's structured as an asset purchase sale, so it doesn't matter. I have my own entities. Again, the situation will dictate which way it takes you, but what I have is a holding company that purchases the assets, and then the intangible and tangible assets like the customer list and websites and things like that. So for example, the Harrisburg store was a straight asset purchase agreement. I was leasing the building, buying all the equipment, buying the name, buying the copyrights, and buying the customer list. But the previous owner's corporation, which was just their name incorporated, was selling me the equipment. And so all of my businesses are C Corps. There's different ways, and I actually talk about that in the book, the different ways to organize your company. But the only time you would keep the prior entity is if it's an equity buyout. If you buy the shares of the corporation. But that's risky because, like I said, with assumed leases, you take on any bad deals that they had. So I'm actually being sued right now by a uniform company in Pennsylvania that had a contract with the previous owner's corporation, and it's going to be dismissed relatively soon because they're trying to say that when I bought the business I assumed their contract, but because I had my own entity that was completely separate from the prior business entity, I had no obligation to take on that contract, and really the people he should be suing is the previous owners.
So when you talk about seller financing, so me personally, my passion is real estate. So like say I want to go buy like, you know, either residential like income earning property or commercial. Obviously using a seller financing option, you know, what kind of interest rate are you looking at? Like assuming, you know, going through a bank, putting your 20% down, 25% down, say 4.5%. Like what in reality would be your interest rate on using seller financing? Because I'm assuming it has to be higher because it's risky for the seller.
Yeah, so the seller financing deals I've done for a few of my stores have ranged between 5 and 8%, which obviously in the real estate world is higher. I don't want to step my bounds because I know real estate is a highly regulated industry, and I know there's hard money lenders in real estate and things like that for like rehabbing properties and creating income properties. But in terms of what you're saying, yeah, the interest rate is typically higher. But that's all. It's the nice thing about seller financing, it's all negotiable. And depending on what kind of leverage you have, depending on how you do your due diligence and figuring out why they're selling their business, you can negotiate it out completely. You could do zero interest on it. My Chicago store is actually zero interest, and that was 100% a leverage play. Like I just figured out that this guy was going to be in a really bad place if he didn't sell his business by Friday. And so I came in and I put an offer on the table that he basically was either going to have to throw everything in the back of a U-Haul and try to sell it on eBay, or he could, you know, take a little bit of money and accept the fact that he was in a bad position. So, but you're right, it's usually higher than traditional financing.
Now that you have sources of revenue, do you still look to buy new businesses in those same methods you mentioned before, or do you
So,
like bank loans and stuff like that?
that's a great question because I am at the point where I'm not doing that anymore. I mean, I still carve out some time every day to look at businesses for sale because there are certain industries that I would like to dip my toes into, and now that I'm pretty established, I think it'd be really cool to own a pizza place. That's just a personal preference. I love pizza. I'd be our best customer. But the Baltimore store, now what I'm doing is I'm looking at vacant quick loop buildings, and that would be because a lot of my stores, now that I have the resources, I've made the connections, I have my distributors. This is not something you can do right off the bat. You can't go into a vacant building and start what you can, but it would be difficult. But now that I have connections, I can go into a vacant quick loop and get the equipment, get the supplies, and start a business basically from scratch. And that's what I'm doing with Baltimore, or I'm trying to do with Baltimore currently, is that there's an abandoned Jiffy Lube, and I'm negotiating a lease there right now. And I have enough equipment between my 5 stores that I can take some from here, to the empty one, and open up a whole new location.
So when you said you bought and sold 7 different stores, at what point did you decide that it's time to sell and look for another store to replace that or to expand?
So the business I sold was a buddy of mine. We opened a vape store in Catonsville, and I myself, I don't vape, but the margins on vaping are fantastic. But this was a couple years ago, and vaping, I just saw the legislation coming down the road in Maryland. Maryland's a very regulated state relative to some of the other states. And so Maryland, I just saw the writing on the wall, and I said, look, you know, it's going to be really expensive to run this place, and neither of us actually care about vaping. Like, I wasn't passionate about it. I mean, it was neat. It made a lot of money, but I said, let's get out of this. And literally 3 months later, they changed a very important rule. Does anyone in here vape? So like the juices for vaping is made from like kosher glycerin, and you add flavors to it. And so before you could literally make it yourself, and you could get a big 55-gallon drum of the stuff and make it in bottles in the back. And then the state of Maryland came in and said, no, you need a private label company to come in and make your juices for you. And it went from like making 10 milliliters of juice for like 10 cents and selling it for $5 to getting it for $1 and still selling it for $5. So that's when we made the decision to sell that one. Haven't sold any of my quick lubes, don't plan to. It's kind of my baby, and I want to grow it into something I can pass on.
Would you say the finance is more important before you buy the business or after you buy it?
What? Go a little deeper.
Like as you're looking into the business or what you're thinking about, do you focus on finance more there, or like while you're running the business?
So it depends on your situation, because if you're looking to just get in, then you're more focused on the financing before, because you want to make sure that you're in a situation to get it. So like when you do a seller financing deal, you're going to want to offer enough to make it worthwhile for you to still run the business and make enough money. So if you're looking at the books and they're making $100,000 in revenue a year, and the owner pays himself a $30,000 a year salary, and you want to factor in maybe $25,000 of that as seller financing back to the previous owner so you can buy the business, then you have that $5,000 buffer right there to work with in case business goes down. That's what you think of if you're just trying to get in. Now, if you're trying to replace your income, then you need to be a little more cognizant of it. But once you're in the business, cash flow is everything. So I focus 100% on top-line revenue at all my stores for the first year. Top-line revenue is the most important thing to me in the first year of a new store, customer acquisition, and then obviously the whole point is once they're in the door, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, they'll come back.
You said quick lube is you said it's your baby and you want to keep that something to pass down. How would you say your connection with your employees or your quick lube location? Like, do you have a deep connection with all of them? Like, you talk with them a lot, or is it more like
Yeah, so I have a group text with my managers. I'm really close to my Harrisburg manager. Obviously, it was my first store, and he had been there for a while, so he helped me out immensely. That was key to the success of that store, was having him. And all of my employees, it's a high turnover industry, so I lose a lot of guys. I have a lot of younger people that work for me. But my managers, all of the stores I have really close connections with, I talk to on a daily basis. But my full-time guys and my part-time guys, I try to get to know their needs as much as I can. Try to figure out what what they do when they're out of work. What I can do to make their lives easier. Just open line of communications. 2017 technology makes it really easy to be able to connect with everyone, even if you're not physically there. So just gotta do your best.
What would be one of the worst kind of locations for your type of business?
A very thinly populated place where people don't drive very much. Amish are great though, because they do a lot of work for not very much money. My Dillsburg store has a lot. There's an Amish community around there. They do a lot. They build good sheds too. But so like DC doesn't have many quick lubes. You think that, and that's a very populated area and a very rich area, but a lot of people don't drive. So one thing that has helped me with buying existing locations, especially if it's previously a Jiffy Lube, is Jiffy Lube has already invested the hundreds of thousands of dollars of doing a feasibility study to see what the car counts are, the traffic counts are. So if I see there's a Jiffy Lube building there, that means I know someone already had done, because Jiffy Lube isn't just going to put a location anywhere. Now my Harrisburg location, which is was built in 1930 by a couple of truckers who thought it would be fun to own their own business. So I don't know what kind of studies they did, but yeah, there's definitely, location is important. You can't have it in like a residential neighborhood. It's got to be. So my Pittsburgh store is on Route 30, which goes all the way through Gettysburg, all the way pretty deep in Pennsylvania. Goes through Maryland for a little bit. My Dillsburg store is on Route 15. My Harrisburg store is on Route 22, Jonestown Pike. And the Chicago store is on some random road, but it's a busy road. But everything in Chicago is busy. Like, if you ever go to Chicago, the traffic is ridiculous.
So, like coming out of college and you started getting like desk jobs and like zero price and stuff, what made you really want to get out of that? Like, was it the idea of working for yourself, or was it the idea of you can make more money, or was there anything that really stuck out to you that you wanted to go on your own for?
Yeah. So when I first got out of Mount St. Mary's, I originally played some minor league baseball. So I had gone from living in Fairmont to living in Macon, Georgia, to living in Pensacola, Florida, to living in Detroit, Michigan. And then I played overseas in Germany. And so I had a lot of autonomy. I lived on my own a lot. I had no one really to listen to other than coaches. And when I came back to Maryland, which is a very high cost of living state, you needed a nice job just to afford your rent. And so my first real grown-up job was at TD Bank, and I got it by happenstance. And even while I was there, like I wanted my own thing. I was making custom baseball bats out of my garage and selling them on eBay. So even then, I was still like my entrepreneur tendencies were still pulling at me, even while I had those desk jobs. But really, what it came down to was TD Bank was one of the businesses I got fired from. And the reason I got fired from TD Bank was because I tried to bring my work home with me because I wanted to do more. Like I wanted to leave my mark on the business. Because it's really tough to work for someone else when you feel like you're not making an impact on what's going on. And when you work at a company as large as TD Bank or T. Rowe Price, it's really hard to see the value that you give, and it's hard to see the impact that you make. And it sometimes change is really slow. And so it was a combination of wanting to create something that I could make my own, the autonomy of it, and just the ability to have a say in what happened.
How much of the information that you need to run a business would you say you actually learned like in the classroom versus on your own? And like the second question is, do you have any mentors, or did you have any mentors, anyone that helped you like make the transition?
So I honestly think entrepreneurship is something that's tough to teach. I think, like I said, like if you don't have those early on stories of flipping things, blow pops in school and stuff like burning CDs and selling them to kids, like if you don't have those stories, sometimes I think it's more difficult. I don't think it's impossible. I think a good operator can run a business. But in terms of my schooling, I was a political science major at Mount St. Mary's. So not a whole lot helped me in terms of business. But my Master's of Science in Finance that TD Bank paid for helped me with P&Ls. And that helped me, because if my first business that I bought, say it was a huge failure, maybe I would have been discouraged. Knowing me, probably not. I probably would have kept going. But like for some people, it might be a big discouragement. But knowing how to read a P&L, I knew I was going to step into this business that was marketing in the year 1980 and implement 2014 marketing and bring it to the next level. And as far as mentors go, I didn't have any mentors until 2015 when I was introduced to, does anyone here know who Gary Vaynerchuk is?
Oh, Gary Vee on Instagram?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say he's the closest thing to a mentor that I've had. But other than that, my dad, immigrant, barely graduated high school, built his own business, never really worked for anyone else. So he's a good role model, good person to look up to.
What are some of the main problems you face with having all these businesses, especially when the ones in different locations?
So, I mean, that's pretty much it, the geographic aspect of it. If there's a problem in Pittsburgh, it's tough because I can't get out. I mean, I can get out there same day, but it would have to be like, I mean, someone would have to fall into the pit for me to have to go out to Pittsburgh. Some of the other tougher, when I first started, it was funny because my older employees never really had a problem with me being, because at the time my first store I was 25. But when some of my younger guys had a problem working for someone my age, that was a difficulty at first, was getting them on board. But, you know, with the technology we have now, it's so easy. You know, with my iPhone runs half of my business. It's crazy, just the technology we have. We take a lot of it for granted. So there's a lot of advances that have allowed people to run their own business with very little overhead. But I think it's the geographic part that is the biggest difficulty.
Let's do one more question, and then people can come down and ask you more questions after.
Okay.
Do it.
So you kind of answered this slightly, but like I was kind of curious specifically, what prompted your Chicago store? Because like all of them around the general vicinity of where you are, but Chicago obviously.
So you have to go where the situation takes you. Not every business that's for sale online is a potential zero-down business. I paid $5,000 for the Chicago store, and it does $300,000 in revenue a year. I'm going to make $100,000 off that store alone, and all I have to do is spend $1,500 in flights a year. I mean, if someone proposed to you, okay, you have to spend $1,500 worth of flights in a year, but you got to go to Chicago twice a month, but you're going to get $100,000. Kind of no-brainer. Like, it's just about how much work you want to put in, how, you know, you just really got to go where the situation takes you. So I'm constantly requesting the books on different businesses, and sometimes the owner's like, nope, go to a bank, get the money up front. Okay, well, nope, sorry. So you go to the next one. And so, you know, I was in Florida a couple weeks ago looking at a store in Naples that was really close to the airport. The Chicago store is 5 minutes from O'Hare, which is another thing. Like, my costs are so minimal. My flights to O'Hare from BWI, because I joined the Spirit $9 Fare Club, is it's a $44 round trip flight. It's amazing. Like, you just can't be fancy. Like, you just can't be fancy.
Do you want to talk about building a brand?
Costa, thank you very much.